All right, hello everyone. Today we're looking at kids' TV and radio programming with the main question of why are there specific TV shows for kids and TV shows designed for adults? So if we were to look at some of the general themes in kids' TVs, we have talking trains, we've got talking animals, and we've got really scary looking Teletubbies. While in adults' TV programming, we have things about crime and relationships. But if we were to relate this back to what we know about entertainment in the medieval era and early modern eras, we would remember that mainly kids and adults did the same things. And that was because kids spent more time with their parents. If we were to apply this to a timeline between the Industrial Revolution and more so modern day, uh, we can look at it in terms of the changes in childhood and how these events like the Industrial Revolution and the First World War impacted those. So the Industrial Revolution, as we talked about before, is pretty much the birth of the childhood. Before the Industrial Revolution, kids were mandated to work to help support their families. And once factory production made the creation of goods easier, faster, and more affordable, kids now had time to go to school rather than go to work to support the family economy. Now, the First World War was a time of extreme hardship, and many families were broken apart as fathers, uncles, and older brothers went to serve in the military, with many of them not coming back. And in the 1920s, after the victory of the First World War and the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, there was a lot of financial security for people who were in the Allied and victorious countries. Now, this all came crashing down in the 1930s and 1940s when we had the hardship of the Wall Street crash and the Second World War, again with families being broken apart, with male and female relatives serving overseas. When war was won in 1945, again victory came to the Allies, and with that, prestige and money with financial security. And this leaves us in this new sort of generation in the 1960s, where kids are growing up with enough money to get by and to afford mod cons, to have things like dishwashers, clothes washers, refrigerators, things that not everyone had just 2 decades ago. But they also have a lot of freedom. And that's what's going to feed into our lesson today, all about the different types of TV programming for these kids. So, entertainment aimed at children. It all started off with radio programming, and this began as early as the early 1920s, where between 5 and 6 p.m. was known as Children's Hour. And this was really the 1 hour a day where programming would be designed specifically at children. And it was aimed between 5 and 6 p.m., as this was usually just before dinner or just after and before kids would be getting ready for bed. And they were aimed at audiences both years 5 and under. Now, Listen with Mother, this was transmitting songs and stories in the early 1950s, had about 1 million people who were listening. And Listen with Mother is going to translate a little bit later in the later 1950s into Watch with Mother, which won't be on the radio, but will be on television. Older kids, they liked different stories, and Journey into Space and Jet Morgan were essentially radio broadcasted uh, shows, if you will, that were the last ones to really attract an audience equal to that size of television. Dick Barton's Secret Agent, very much so the same. We can see them recording Dick Barton's Secret Agent here on the right-hand side, and this peaked with about 15 million viewers. Now, the 1950s saw many radio programs that were glorifying the lives of soldiers and spies, and this simply links back to the fact that many kids grew up in a household in the 1930s and 40s with a father or a male member of their home who was in the armed forces. And by having these sort of themes in TV and radio programs, it was much more relatable to young kids. Watch with Mother, it appeared in 1953. It was kind of the evolution of Listen with Mother, which of course was on the radio. Watch with Mother is going to be on television. It ran until 1980, and it featured puppets like Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men in the early 1950s. They kind of lived at the bottom of a suburban garden. The Wooden Tops were something straight out of the Nightmares Factory. They were a group of middle class family. They lived on a farm, and they were mainly intending to teach preschool children kind of about family life and family values. Now, the 1950s saw a drive to recruit dedicated staff that were fully aware of the need to instill a moral ethos into programs. And that meant that the BBC was really pushing towards these kind of paternalistic, middle class values to instill on young kids. And they received a lot of criticism over this. In 1957 saw the debut of two pigs named Pinky and Perky, and they would sing modern pop songs in high-pitched harmonic voices. Now, the 1970s. By 1972, the BBC was transmitting about 14 hours of kids' entertainment every week. Magazine programs have always been very popular. Blue Peter, it still runs today. This led the way to become one of the longest running kids' TV programs in the world, constantly reinventing itself to meet the challenging needs and trends that remain true to its core values. Now, in 1978, the BBC launched its groundbreaking drama called Grange Hill. It was set in a secondary school and it went to talk about a lot of the difficult situations and controversial issues that would face young people in that time. Let's not forget 1978 is right in the middle of the Cold War, and kids, especially in the UK, felt very misunderstood by their parents. And Grange Hill offered those kids a bit of an outlet to be more related to through television. Now, with the growth of videos and DVDs, the internet, smartphones, kids' entertainment has changed a lot. And no longer do kids have to watch their entertainment on TV, but they can access it on online platforms like Netflix and even YouTube. Looking at marionette puppets, this was the main way that kids' TV was created as early as the mid 1940s and all the way through until the late 1970s and 1980s. Muffin the Mule was the first real marionette puppet who was popularized on TV. His accomplice, Annette Mills, she would sit Muffin on top of her piano and she would sing songs and talk to Muffin about the challenges of growing up and how to be a good person. And these songs were very catchy for kids to listen to and sing along with. Now, the marionette puppet technology improved a lot with the show Thunderbirds, which can be seen at the bottom right. This used electronic wires to actually send controls to the head so the heads could rotate back and forth and the eyes could even blink. This is something that Muffin the Mule, as we can see, is quite simple. You can even see the wires here and didn't have the electronic components that Thunderbirds did have. Now it's time for our bonus facts. The BBC today has a little bit more kids' entertainment to watch. As we already discussed in the 1970s, the BBC was broadcasting about 14 hours of kids' entertainment per week. Now they're looking at 14 hours per day, and that runs from about 7 in the morning till about 9 in the evening. That's a total of 98 hours weekly. This is not on top of content on YouTube or Netflix that can also be accessed by kids. The puppets from the Thunderbirds were actually really big. They were about 22 inches in height. And the reason why they're this large is it's much easier to sew a costume for a puppet that is, 2 feet tall rather than a puppet that's just 6 inches in size. It's also easier to manipulate them. As we can see in the image here, they have to be able to bend the fingers around different things like steering wheels. They have to be able to make belts and different articles of clothing for them to wear. So the larger these puppets are, the easier they'll be to manipulate. The military theme wasn't just for TV. You may have heard of G.I. Joe. That's on the right-hand side. It was a really popular kids' toy in America. And again, this glorified the whole dad was in the army sort of lifestyle that many kids lived through in the 1940s. So this was an incredibly popular toy in the 50s and 60s. That toy was rebranded in the UK not as G.I. Joe. GI means general issue. That's what they considered all of the articles of clothing given to an American soldier was general issue, so they earned the name GI. They actually called him Action Man. He was an action soldier here. But we can see the box is pretty much the exact same. And the Photoshop job on G.I. Joe is simply just pasting over with a white piece of paper that says Action Man. That concludes our lesson today on kids radio and TV entertainment. Have a look at Show My Homework and complete any of the other tasks set by your teacher.